Okay.
Hello, everyone.
Recording in progress.
Go ahead, Andrew.
All right, thank you so much. Good morning and good afternoon to all. Thanks for joining the session today. It's the final day of APrIGF, and we've had some interesting discussions on various IG topics. It's also nice to see a great community of practice within the APrIGF forum. I guess despite the challenges we face today, everyone's working together and building this community together. So today's session is on digitally led inclusive growth. Before I start, quick housekeeping rules. Please mute your mic and use the chat forum if you wish to raise any discussion points. You can use the Q&A. We also believe in an inclusive process, so we have live transcription and caption for you. So yeah, let's start. COVID-19 crisis has pushed more communities online at a faster rate, accelerated the adoption of e-commerce, and facilitated the rapid dissemination of new digital skills, tools, e-health services, and remote work applications. Today, we have a great team of experts in the room who will talk about the challenges, but also opportunities for locally and regionally driven digital solutions. So we have a diverse group of speakers. First up, we have John Carr, who is the Senior Director for the Asia Foundation. We have Anne Dunn, who is the Commissioner for the Online Safety Commission.
Andrew 都轉 co-host 啊，唔該。
Sorry? Oh.
Sorry, we were making you co-host. Sorry to interrupt. Go ahead.
So let me just repeat. Anne Dunn, Commissioner for the Online Safety Commission in Fiji. Andrew Ewer, Head of Public Affairs in Google, Australia. Dennis Hu, the Director for the Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation Policy Support Unit. And some of you are familiar with APAC in Singapore. So let's start with John Carr. Thinking about the post-COVID period and from an internet or tech perspective, are there issues or challenges the region should be thinking about that haven't gotten a lot of attention? John, over to you.
Well, thanks, Andrew. Really appreciate it. And good afternoon. Thanks to organizers making the time to consider this important set of issues. I'm John Carr. I'm the Senior Director for Technology Programs at the Asia Foundation. We're a US-based organization with a presence in Asia going back over 60 years. We have offices across the region, and including one in Kathmandu. A very important area of our work and a program that I lead is focusing on how we can leverage digital technologies to aid in the region's continued development. So I'm very sorry to not be with you all today. I've visited Nepal many times over the years. It's a beautiful country. The reason I'm not able to join you today is actually related to the topic of our conversation, the COVID crisis and its impact on the region. How can internet-connected digital tools support the region's resilience in this time of crisis? That is an important topic. That's the thing I'm going to try to talk about here. So we've got a great panel, a great moderator. I'm happy to be part of the conversation. I also wanted to take a moment to highlight the release of a new Asia Foundation publication that maps to this discussion quite well. And it's a paper that we're calling 6 Stories of Resilience: Digital Technologies as Drivers of Development in the COVID-19 Era. So I'm going to drop a link in the chat to everyone, and you all can get access to the document and have a look at it. I'd love to talk more about it when we have our conversation later in the session. So back to the topic at hand, it's COVID and the terrible cost in lives around the world. Been unimaginable. We know this quite well here in the United States, but there have been other less visible damage to livelihoods that we may be wrestling with for some time. We're not able to travel to the conference due to the pandemic. Travel restrictions and other constraints on movement have reduced economic, social activity around the world. Small businesses in Asia have been harmed in many ways. The ADB reported that at least 30% of MSMEs in the region experienced a drop in demand for goods and services. and at least 41% of these small businesses temporarily closed. In the Philippines, it was even worse. 2020 was a particularly difficult year. Upwards of 70% of small businesses temporarily closed at one point during the pandemic. MSMEs have observed cancellations of contracts, supply chain disruptions, cash shortages, layoffs, and just a contraction in demand overall. Same goes for rural communities. Small farmers have suffered disruption in logistics, limiting their market reach, affecting their income. Children are bearing extremely high costs because their education is being disrupted. Students are missing large portions of the school year. More than 20 million secondary age girls could drop out of school globally, and 1.2 million in East Asia and the Pacific region. So these are significant effects that will persist for some time. Provision of healthcare has been constrained. The region is understaffed when it comes to human resources, staffing clinics and vaccination sites. And so there's a human toll here. And specifically for developing and middle income countries, there'll probably be setbacks. So one way to think about this is through the lens of the UN SDGs. And prior to the pandemic, less than a decade away from the deadline for meeting these objectives, we really didn't appear to be on track to meeting them. And now with COVID, it appears even more challenging. So this is a real problem that development professionals think about quite a lot. And the pandemic seems to be putting up more obstacles to the region's development. But digital tools may present some path to recovery. I think that's, what our paper is talking about. That's what I'd like to talk about in our session. Digital trends have accelerated in the region. Virtual and remote work is one example. We're on a virtual call here. Where adoption rates were slower. The pandemic appears to have accelerated or given new life to trends. Online education, remote healthcare are some examples. And when we think about it, we think perhaps these changes are likely not transitory. Businesses and education providers have invested in digital adoption during the pandemic. Workers are receiving training and upskilling using online platforms. Consumers are changing their preferences. They're really leaning in on digital transactions. Patients are receiving healthcare using telemedicine at lower costs. So there's also this interesting component of a mix of online and offline. We're calling this sort of hybrid work going forward. Telemedicine and in-person care is one example. And this may persist for some time going forward. It may well be permanent. So these digital tools are enabling a kind of repathing of traditional ways of working. So we're moving from one path to another, and that change might be permanent. It really depends on how people value these new approaches and what they're getting out of them. So looking beyond this period, hybridization is likely to have profound effects on international development as we emerge from crisis-driven digital transformation, acceleration of hybridization, particularly in the healthcare sector, education, MSME development. This ultimately could actually enhance our efforts to achieve UN SDGs. So at the Asia Foundation, we're really looking closely at how digital technologies are building COVID resilience, shaping and accelerating recovery. We feel these new approaches are really diffusing within APAC in ways that are likely to persist post-COVID. So back to the report, we highlight different dimensions of what we call digital resilience in the COVID era, really through personal stories from across the region. In Vietnam, small business owners are accessing new skills and training. They're using a platform called Go Digital ASEAN, which the Asia Foundation is working on with Google across the ASEAN region to provide new technical skills for small business owners. During this COVID period, it's all online. And it's really interesting how many people have been trained thus far. Over 150,000 small business owners in the ASEAN region. We talk about a data scientist in Indonesia with advanced technical skills, but still able to develop and sharpen them using online courseware during the pandemic, not able to attend class, but still able to build their skills in critical areas. Farmers in Cambodia accessing new online buyers during the crisis, new healthcare tools using AI to identify at-risk patients, and a really great story about an online platform that helps organize volunteers in Malaysia to volunteer at vaccination centers in the country. So APAC is really sort of adapting to the COVID's challenges using digital tools. It's really interesting to see it happen. Digital appears to be really key to supporting the region's resilience during periods of crisis. These are new opportunities that are developing and could shape and accelerate the region's recovery. And also, again, I mentioned before this idea of redoubling our effort to achieve the UN SDGs once we've dealt with the problems of the pandemic. But there are still challenges. Digitally led recovery, it's not really a given. The digital divide is a problem, and it remains a concern. By 2019, only half the global population, nearly 20% of people in the least developed countries had access to the internet. Digital divide has a significant gender component. Policymakers need to take that into account. Globally, there are 300 million fewer women than men able to access the internet. Smartphone ownership is 20% lower for women than men. And 207 million out of 393 million women in the world without smartphones live in South Asia. So these are really interesting statistics. So addressing this digital divide is becoming even more important during the pandemic. If we don't do it, we risk deepening the inequalities, I think. And that's why we need to tackle some of the big policy challenges going forward. The region needs policy approaches that enable digital solutions. APAC should really be thinking about investing in accessibility and affordability, promoting digital skills, paying attention to online risks and cybersecurity matters. These are really important. And then fostering innovation through structural reforms that encourage new digital first entrepreneurship. And these are things that we should all be thinking about. That's what we were focused on at the Asia Foundation. I hope you take a look at the white paper that we've developed. I think by working together, we can lower the risk of COVID now, and then also think about how the region can emerge stronger and healthier and maybe more prepared to take on future challenges. So I really look forward to the discussion going forward. So thank you, Anju.
Great. Thank you so much, John. Thanks for highlighting that small businesses are suffering, and we see similar issues here in Fiji as well. There's big disruption and people are generally struggling. And I'm glad that the Asia Foundation is doing a lot of work for the region, particularly in reducing the digital gender gap. So for those of you that have joined, let me introduce you to Anne, who is our next speaker. She is the Commissioner for the Online Safety Fiji. Digital Fiji has announced plans to invest around 13 million FJD, which is US $6.2 million in upgrading its 4G LTE infrastructure to meet the demand resulting from the pandemic. This accelerated rollout will leave a permanent legacy in terms of connectivity and is expected to be completed by October. Do you think this will impact your work, and how will you adapt to this rapid increase in connectivity? And over to you.
Thanks, Anju. Bula vinaka, everyone, and good afternoon. And I think the short answer is yes. Any type of rapid connectivity will definitely impact sort of how we relate as the Commission to our people and online safety in general throughout the country. So I'll just pull back for a second, but it's really great to be able to join this session because we know that COVID-19 has had many impacts on the way that we live our lives, especially pre-2020. And this includes the way that we've used technology to be able to enhance a lot of our day-to-day activities, as described by John earlier, from the way that we conduct our work meetings to just the growth in e-commerce that we've seen throughout the country, but also the resources that we've put in to be able to educate our people, and even to hosting entire events, including conferences such as this, to be able to host them on digital platforms and online. And we've seen Fijians in many of our Pacific Island countries have harnessed sort of the positive nature of what technology gives us and what it gives us the opportunity to do. And so with at least 70% of our population here in Fiji noted as internet users, and 65% of us being able to access the internet from our mobile devices, we've definitely witnessed a dramatic but largely positive response to sort of that shift to digitalization. And so I do note, however, that some of the efforts to transition to digitalization is in its teething stages. Many of our government facilities had swiftly made the efforts during our most recent experience with COVID-19 in April of this year to better serve our people using the technologies that were available. And one of the clearest examples of this was when we rolled out the Care Fiji app throughout the country during our COVID-19 nationwide restrictions and lockdowns, which took place between, I think, May to July. But this really helped our health sector sort of benefit from its contact tracing abilities. And so we've seen the growth in technologies from connectivity around the country, creativity, and being able to shop online, and even the gaining momentum of paying things at the supermarket through scanning of QR codes. And so we note that COVID-19, and I think John had mentioned this earlier, is that this global pandemic has really escalated the move to digitalization, and that's visible here in Fiji, mostly in our urban areas. However, it's also stressed a lot of the challenges. And so if there's one thing that we've also noticed at the Commission that has also consistently been on the rise is the challenges for us that we now face as a society, as communities, to be able to tackle some of the ills that have come with the technology, not necessarily the devices themselves, but with the way that we use it. And so we've witnessed a rise in reports of online abuse here at the Commission. And I think just in terms of background, in Fiji, the Online Safety Commission was only recently established in 2019. And so when we came into 2020, that pandemic and the experience of the global pandemic coming into this year has really impacted and shifted the way that we view online safety. And so some of the ills that came with it was online bullying, it was rapid misinformation throughout the country, and it was particularly targeting women and children, and our children here. And I know that that's not unique to Fiji. It is a global issue when it comes to the way information is shared. And so we've witnessed that rise in reports compared to our 2 years in the recent months. And it's evident that online bullying or harassment of our women, and even non-consensual image sharing on social platforms, on social media platforms, have become these social dilemmas that have really devastated and have impacts on our businesses and the way that people do their work day to day, especially as we shift out of our COVID-19 experience from April here in the country, where we've recently just had our curfews gone or shifted from 9 p.m. or from 4 to 9 p.m. to 4 to 10. And so just having our borders sort of open up domestically have really given us the opportunity to sort of step back and look at what the 4 months or the recent 6 months have really done for us and how we've used our platforms in these digital spaces. And so there is a great need to empower our people to use technology safely and responsibly. And part of our role as the Commission is to be able to facilitate and advocate for that We provide valuable resources online through our website, but also reaching out to communities, working with law enforcement to be able to do that, and hosting even programs such as our online safety champions to be able to harness the better opportunity or the advantages that are given through these technologies. So we know that while there are risks that come with any sort of new venture, we do think that Fiji is at a critical point in sort of deciding where we are technologically to be able to decide for ourselves how we choose to enjoy sort of the benefits with the growing connectivity, and noting that program, like as infrastructure grows, so does the ability to be able to empower our people to use that infrastructure and use that technology wisely and safely. And so we recognize that neither government institutions or digital providers could resolve any issue isolated. And so there is a need for multi-stakeholder engagement. And so we recognize that digitalization will definitely require everyone to participate and explore what works for us and what doesn't work for us in terms of the society and the culture that we bring from our offline values to our offline environment or to our online environments. So I am looking forward to this discussion and just exploring what digitalization looks like specifically for the Pacific and for Fiji. Vinaka.
Thanks, Anne. For a small country like Fiji, it's important to shift to digitalization, particularly for governments to come up with approaches to connect the unconnected in outer islands. But it's also for other sectors to be prepared to some of the emerging issues, like you said, the rise in reports of incidents and cyberbullying and online threats. How do we manage that, and what can we do in terms of cross-sectoral approaches? So Andrew, going to you now. Coming out of the COVID crisis, what does recovery look like for Asia? And what is the role, what role does Google play in it? One aspect of the recovery will likely be led by startups, which have the capacity to address hyper-local needs in ways that other stakeholders might not. With the pandemic in mind, how is Google supporting the internet startup community in the region, given that we have the pandemic?
Thanks so much, Andrew. And let me take those two questions in turn, but let me please start by wishing everyone in Nepal the best. A shame not to be there. I love Nepal. I'm speaking from the Sunshine Coast in Australia, sort of midway up the east coast of Australia. So I just want to acknowledge I'm here on the home of the Kabi and Jinibara peoples, the traditional custodians here, and I'd like to pay respect to their elders, past, present, and emerging, before speaking. To come on to the first question, I think Asia Pacific was hit early and hard by the pandemic, but we've seen incredible resilience and adaptability across the region, and technology has been critical to that response. We see it in the use from governments who use and continue to use digital platforms to share vital health information, and we've been very pleased to have been supporting with our exposure notification API, but you also see a lot of technology in terms of, who knew QR codes would make a bigger comeback in many countries. So it's been a big part of that recovery. People have been able, as John was saying, to continue working from home, preserve their jobs. Small businesses have shifted their operations online and learned how to use new digital tools on a massive scale. A trend I think that was already happening, but greatly accelerated from COVID. Schools, teachers, and students have managed an unprecedented, almost overnight shift to remote learning, and massive hats off to those parents who were able to manage through that homeschooling. But in all these areas, Asia Pacific was first affected, and Asia Pacific modeled how to respond. And I think a key part of that is thinking through then what are the blockers as we look to recovery. What can enable that? What are the blockers? And we did some work with Temasek and Bain last year, report on Southeast Asia, to identify what could those blockers be. 6 of them came up: internet access, payments, talent, consumer trust, funding, and logistics. And of all of those, the one area where the region has made the least progress has actually been investing in human capital, expanding digital education and training. So that's really critically important. That's why I'm pleased from the Google side that we've committed to train 3 million people in digital skills in ASEAN. And that's part of, I think, what needs to be a very big approach covering both the private sector and the public sector to ensure that people are ready to take advantage as we look to post-COVID recovery in all those different areas to be able to have the skills to manage that coming out of that. Partnerships, in other words, is going to be really critical. We work a lot, for example, with the government of Thailand on Safan Digital, in Indonesia, together with local tech companies like Gojek, also universities and the government on a project called Bangkit, which is designed to help develop young digital talent. And that program is expanding. Similarly, a great partnership with ASEAN, the ASA Foundation. So thank you, John, for working with nonprofits across ASEAN to help 200,000 small business owners or workers get the skills they need to digitize. And importantly, half of those are women. So in terms of kind of like recovery, the digital infrastructure is really critical. The human capital is really critical. It's maybe worthwhile thinking about it on a kind of sector specific basis. So if you look at tourism, for example, that's an industry that's been incredibly hard hit. So we've been working a lot with the Vietnamese National Tourism Administration to try and help in specific ways for tourism recovery, both in terms of using digital tools to help the government understand underlying demand and make better informed decisions about when recovery will happen and how to manage that, by helping tourism businesses go online and understand how to navigate the online environment. And we've trained 330,000 businesses in that area, many of them tourism businesses, by really helping to create the tools for the natural talent of Vietnam to come to life. And we've been working with YouTube creators in Vietnam to produce videos that inspire people to visit Vietnam as the lockdowns end. And finally, we've been working to showcase Vietnam through our arts and culture online program. And I encourage everyone to go check out the Google Arts and Culture website and look up Wonders of Vietnam. It's got these amazing exhibitions and pictures highlighting the top tourism spots in Vietnam. So that's a long way of saying, just by way of example of tourism in Vietnam, that there's a lot of ways that I think technology in general can help support the post-COVID recovery. And on the startups piece, I'll just be quick on that. We know that if startups succeed, local communities and economies do too. And that's really the grassroots of the future economy, and those small startups in each country can develop into really substantial businesses, employing people and driving the economy. And if you think about Asia Pacific, it's a tremendous opportunity. 2.8 billion smartphone owners, growing economic weight. Many of Asia's domestic markets are enormous, but cloud services are helping people also scale globally cheaply. On the talent side of things as well, there's a critical mass of the type of generalist engineers who do well in the startup world, joining founders within Asia's traditional engineering hubs of the past few decades, like Beijing, Taipei, Bangalore, Seoul, Tokyo, but also in the newer centers in Southeast Asia. And the attitude towards technology in the region, I think, is quite different and gives us tremendous opportunity and potential as well. So we're, of course, as a former startup ourselves, I know that seems hard to imagine, but 25 odd years ago, we know the journey that startups are on, and we're very focused on supporting that, which is why we have a number of on-site campuses to help startups navigate from Sao Paulo through to Seoul, Tokyo, and elsewhere in the region, to help startup owners connect with each other and share lessons and provide essentially a support network. And as we emerge from the pandemic, deepening those networks and providing the platform for the startups of this region and the talent that is here endemic in the region to find the growth out of there will be really critical. So I might just stop there and acknowledge, again, thanks to folks for this panel and look forward to it further.
Thanks, Andrew. So while everyone is going online, it's quite clear that we need more investment in digital skills and talent. So I'm glad you mentioned partnership and collaboration, which is very important. And I'm happy to hear that Google is providing opportunities to women and girls in particular. Thank you for that. So Dennis, over to you. Could you elaborate on some of the skills that SMEs need to be able to participate effectively in e-commerce? And maybe share some of the cross-border issues that need to be tackled to ensure e-commerce works smoothly. Maybe you could also share some ongoing APAC initiatives, pertaining to the digital economy work that you're doing on e-commerce.
Sure, Anju. First of all, I'd like to thank the organizers and particularly John for inviting me for this forum and in this panel session. So I'm Dennis. I come from the APAC Policy Support Unit. APAC is an economic and trade forum that focuses on economic and trade integration in the Asia Pacific region. And we're essentially the research arm. We've done lots of different kinds of work related to COVID-19 since last year. And maybe just to start off, since we're talking about micro, small, medium enterprises and what kind of skills that they need, I think it's important to stress that perhaps the micro, small, medium enterprises were the most vulnerable to the pandemic, given the fact that they don't have as much resources or human capital. So the impact was perhaps the most severe last year. And you can see that different governments in different parts of the region have been focusing on trying to support these businesses so that they can stay afloat. And I think that's quite crucial, partly because they contribute something like 60–70% of the employment in many economies in the Asia Pacific region, and as well as I would say probably more than 90% of enterprises in the region are essentially micro, small, medium enterprises. So the applications of digital technology has been quite crucial to keep many of these micro, small, medium enterprises going, and in many ways with the applications of these kinds of digital solutions, they've opened up new markets for them. They've also helped in terms of using, whether you're using blockchain technology or different types of digital applications, they're able to deliver these goods and services to the economy, even when we were in a period of a lockdown last year. I think some of you will remember we were all in lockdowns last year, and being able to communicate with each other, whether it's on Zoom or Microsoft Teams or others, was absolutely crucial to keep us going, right? Food deliveries as well was important, right? And I think companies like, well, over here in Singapore where I'm based, companies like Grab or Deliveroo have been making a lot of business, being given the fact that we were, ordering most of our food online. At the same time, I think digital technologies itself is not a panacea to the challenges that micro, small, medium enterprises do face, because I think John talked about it too, that with these types of digital online platforms, there are also rising concerns of issues related to cybersecurity, digital fraud, and other things. So I think it's important, certainly in the APAC region, to see how we can support these companies, these enterprises, particularly to support them with the growing concerns of issues related to hacking, different types of fraud, whether it's from the consumer side or even from the seller side. So what can be done to try to support them? Digital literacy is quite crucial. There's been a lot of capacity building activities that's been done in the APAC region to support these small enterprises. Now, I mean, going to digital skills, I think, again, selling things online is a very different kind of proposition from your normal sort of, in-person, kind of, it's an old term, a bricks and mortar sort of business, right? And I think, it's important for these businesses to have the kind of relevant digital skills that for them to be able to succeed in these digital platforms. For example, I think you need to provide kind of what I call a unique value proposition when you're selling your products online. And what would be quite crucial is how you present it. So the presentations of these products, the right kinds of photos, videos, endorsements of these products and reviews will be quite crucial if you want to get consumers interested in buying the products that you have. Also, there are different kinds of, we know that we've been giving case studies as well last year of how small businesses have been using social media, whether it's Facebook and others, to sell their products, starting off before they start to scale up and move up when their businesses are doing to the likes of eBay and Amazon. But at the same time, they need to recognize that many of these social platforms now are quite customized based on demographics. It could be based on age groups. It could also be based on gender. So selling the right products to the right demographics, to the right groups will be quite important. And again, now this is where the kind of training and will be quite useful. And I think many of these sort of online platforms do have set up academies where they do try to help small businesses to essentially try to address some of these challenges. There's also in the APAC region, we have the APAC Business Advisory Council. So the participation of the private sector is also quite crucial, and trying to get the private sector as well as policymakers together to see what can be done in trying to support these businesses would be quite crucial. Now, I have one last point, and that's related to John's point as well about travel restrictions. I recently written an opinion piece in the Singapore Business Times looking at issues related to travel restrictions. And I think what's happening right now is that you've got this whole spaghetti bowl of different kinds of regulations and health protocols in different countries. It's making it very difficult to travel, right? Whether you're a business traveler or an essential worker. Even defining an essential worker is also quite crucial. What are essential workers? Are they just businessmen, diplomats? What about healthcare workers, seafarers? Now, seafarers is quite important because 90% of global trade is really done by sea. So I think there's a need within the APAC region to see whether we can find a way to standardize, to harmonize the different kinds of procedures, and so to facilitate greater movement, greater cross-border mobility. I think that's quite crucial to be addressed. So I'll just stop here. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Dennis. I like your comment about cross-border approaches. I think that's really relevant, particularly for small island states. And thanks for mentioning digital skills again. It's so important for small businesses to have the right digital skills. And as you said, social media has been great. I can give you lots of examples from the Pacific using social media for businesses, but that's for another time. So talking about digital skills and youths, we will invite Hoang Yen Ta, our brilliant fellow from Vietnam. Hoang, you there? Perhaps you could share your experience. How is digital helping Vietnam maintain resilience in the face of COVID?
I'm not convenient to share to turn on the screen right now, but I would like to share some. So many speakers have shared their knowledge about the digital adoption across Asia Pacific, is including Vietnam, but I would love to add more some perspective on it, but in a but narrow down the focus into Vietnamese businesses. I would like to focus a distinctive performance for those business quickly and have a good preparation for digital adoption, and the one with kind of sort of slow reaction to digitalization. Given the COVID-19 situation, digital adoption like a must for any enterprise to survive. So in Vietnam, some do it well, but some don't. In particular, foreign-owned and large enterprises are doing well in this area. I would like to provide some statistics regarding this field. 90% of large Vietnamese enterprises, they are applying big data analytics, and nearly 90% of them, large enterprises, apply Internet of Things and machine learning as well. A real example for the product of applying those emerging technologies are the emerging of electronic wallets like Zalo Pay, VN Pay, Momo, and e-commerce platform, Shopee, Tiki, and Lazada. However, the state-owned enterprises and small medium-sized enterprises in Vietnam are just at the beginning of their digitalization journey in terms of capacity and management. And yeah, for those businesses that do not keep up pace with digital transformation, especially amidst COVID-19, they very quickly see their business result affected, and they now, some of them are being eliminated from the market. To solve this problem, our government and also NGO like Asia Foundation are John Carr has stated before, they are implementing many initiatives in helping the small businesses to access to new digital skill and provide the support to help them improving the digital capacity. So overall, you can see that there has been a distinctive performance between one have a good traction amid COVID-19 because of their good preparation for digital adoption before and during the pandemic, and the one, for example, SME, small businesses, they sort of have a slow reaction to digitalization. Therefore, some of them are eliminated from the market. So that's my sharing. You can continue our session right now. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much for that intervention. That was really good, especially using your experiences and what the reality is in your country. I think it's important for also the speakers to understand what is happening in your country. So I'm going to go straight to a question posed by Pavel. Because I think we have about 20 minutes, if I'm correct. So post-pandemic environment, when that happens, will be shaped by increasing digitalization. A lot of the firms have not adopted to key digital technologies because of lack of awareness about technologies and also lack of adaptation. What can firms in the Asia Pacific region do differently to make sure they do not fall behind the race during the new normal? John, can I ask you to respond to that, please?
Sure, Andrew, that's a great question. I think that accessing digital skills online, which is something that we're doing with Go Digital ASEAN in partnership with Google and with the ASEAN community at large, is one really great opportunity or way of thinking about accessing digital skills, so that firms that are really small, micro, small, medium enterprises with a few employees will be able to access low-cost training and technical capacity building during this period. I think also there's probably a lot of pressure actually on firms now to adopt digital because of the current conditions. And so there's a kind of a relationship between acceleration of digitalization and the ability for firms to really survive and thrive now and going forward, because we've been in this situation for a year and a half. We'll probably still be in it, I'm sorry to say, in another 6 months. It's hard to tell, but we've got a long road ahead to make our way out of what we would call the new normal. There's gonna be a lot of pressure on firms to connect the dots when it comes to digital skilling and getting access through platforms that are already online that are providing these kinds of capacity building opportunities that are low cost is a great way for firms to get access to these skills.
Andrew, can I add something? Is it okay?
Yes, sure. Please go ahead, Dennis.
Yeah, I think it's also important to look at it in a different way as well, because you're actually seeing in many companies, multinational, there's been an acceleration of actually digitization because of the pandemic. And what that happens is that it may have an impact on labor, because as you know, for example, a lot of women had to exit the labor market earlier last year because of the pandemic, because in many countries, they take a higher proportion of household chores, homeschooling for their kids. So they exit the market earlier. So what happens now is you're seeing many companies applying or accelerating their digitalization, and they may not eventually re-employ many of these female workers or elderly workers as well, who also exit the labor market. So I think it's important to look at digitalization in a different way too. Having this technology is important, but we also need to apply digital technology to improve the livelihoods of people and to ensure that workers are not displaced. I think that's also quite crucial.
Great, thank you so much, Dennis, for that great intervention. And coming to you, so there's lots of online opportunities. People are going online through social media, etc. What are some of the things that online safety is doing in terms of, providing online safety tips for small businesses?
Yeah, thanks, Anju. I think a lot of it is being reiterated throughout this conversation. It's just upskilling on digital skills and being able to build off of empowering the people to use the technology safely and responsibly. And so, like, one really good example of that here in Fiji is being able to partner with Get Safe Online UK to be able to run small awareness programs throughout a spectrum of time, which felt like a really long time ago, but it was last year. And so there were opportunities to be able to go to the actual businesses themselves, implore small businesses and agencies in the countries to be able to attend the sessions and learn what digital economies looked like, what digital frameworks looked like to be able to protect themselves, and what the safeguards were on these technologies to be able to use it. And so I think one of the things that we found is that a lot of people were using, especially here in Fiji, a lot of us were using social media platforms, but we didn't recognize that there were already built-in tools and safety mechanisms that could protect the business, that could protect somebody who had a personal account and was using their own personal account to be able to sell their goods instead of setting up a page or setting up a group specifically for their target audience for that business. And so it was really interesting to see what the dynamics were, but being able to highlight that in 2020, I think going back to 2019 as well, but just working with the organization or working with Get Safe Online to be able to bring that to the forefront of SMEs in the country. But also one thing that really helped that I will touch on is the language barrier in the country is something that was targeted by Get Safe Online in their website. And so the implementation of having local content really reached and benefited a lot of the SMEs and the business sector, because the website was done in the local language, and people were able to access that resource and freely have those advice, even if they didn't have sort of their own ICT team or online safety teams within their own businesses. So that was a really good component of that program.
I'm glad that you mentioned local languages and having, while we talk about digital skills training, we also need to have content in local language so people understand. There is an interesting question on internet shutdowns, and I think I'm going to rephrase it. And Andrew, this might be for you in relation to internet shutdowns, because businesses cannot go on, online business cannot go on if you have internet shutdowns. Do you have any comments on that? And this question is from Nisar.
Sure. Well, it probably comes as no surprise that we would not be fans of internet shutdowns. I think that, post-COVID, for all the reasons we've just talked through, I think as a group, really critical way for people to stay in touch in times of crisis, really critical way for people to find new ways of doing things and keep their livelihoods running. So I think that, for all the reasons we've outlined around the opportunities that entrepreneurs in this region quickly found when they pivoted online, and for all the reasons I think that we discussed around the role that it can play in even in health information, and for people to access the information they need, during COVID to keep their families safe and healthy. I think there's a really strong role for the internet there.
Great. Thank you so much, Andrew. I see a lot of comments from Shrideep and also Ashirwad. Would you like to talk about some of the things that you mentioned in terms of policy and the lack of policies for digital and small businesses? Shrideep, I'll hand it over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Anju. This is Shrideep from Nepal, and I think a lot of the speakers have covered a lot of issues, and I strongly believe that COVID was not just a challenge, but was an opportunity for all of us. When I say as an opportunity, I mean to say, everything went digital. We are reachable to the unreachable people, though we have certain infrastructure and resources problem that we kind of like grew and over adapted. But the problem is, at the fine point when we talk about the major issue was that we encountered is the communication issue. And even at local government level, the leaders, the policymakers were hesitant about what to do, what not to do, whether to use social media as a means of communication. And I think the best example is Facebook. They came out with a certain, the whole thing about having a policy about the COVID-19, and they had their own centers established, and that was a good thing. And I strongly believe that in the internet community, when these things are happening, the community should unite and create certain kind of packages for these governments, these lower economies government, where they lack awareness, and we have to reach out to them, tell them you can use these communication tools for better reaching out to the communities. Because even at my level, I had created a group in Facebook where I was able to spread out good information, valuable information to the public. And even the Nepal government used the social media this time, and it was quite an effective way. And that is what I think we have to collaborate with the government. The community has to bind together, and that's how we are supposed to work, and that's how we are going to unite. Thank you.
That's brilliant, Shrideep. And I think, you've kind of ended my note. I was going to use that in terms of, working together and making sure that we collaborate. But Ashirwad, I think you have a question. Would you like to unmute and ask your question? I think we can give that question to Dennis.
Thank you, Anju. Hello, everyone. This is Ashirwad from Nepal. So first of all, there's some intervention that I would like to make. As soon as the COVID began around April in 2020, we partnered with IEEE in an industry connection program to find out the gaps that was, especially in the education ecosystem, especially in terms of digitization. And we had identified few gaps. The gaps were in terms of accessibility. We had to think about the infrastructure, the connectivity, as well as the language divide. So this gap in accessibility was not technological. If you talk about infrastructure and connectivity, that's a technological side. But when you talk about language divide, it has both. It has a technological side, but it's more of the human side when it comes to language divide. And similarly, in terms of literacy, there was gaps in terms of digital content and solution, skills for teaching and learning, and there was a big industrial skill divide. So I think that I saw some chat where richer people were getting richer. We were talking about that. And that's what industrial skill divide is doing. So the people with industrial development who already have industrial skill, their skills are being advanced, whereas the people who do not have, their skills they still need more skills. So there's this problem. In terms of assessment, it's very hard in digital world to measure the quality of learning or learners' engagement in terms of young kids. And in terms of security, there are cybersecurity, there are issues of human resilience, and there are a lot of future implications that we even have not thought yet. We don't know what future implication this whole digitized world is going to give. So with all this, we found that there was various multi-dimensional complexities that existed in marginalized population, especially young women, internally displaced people, refugees and all. So with all this on frame, my question to Dennis was that all this gap was identified because of one thing, that is digital poverty. United Nations and everybody are trying to eradicate poverty, but they are focusing on economic poverty. But nowadays, not having enough device is a kind of poverty. So my question would be, how do we address this digital poverty, and how do we find out the future implications that this might carry out?
Thank you so much, Ashirwad. That's a brilliant question. Dennis, over to you from an APAC point of view.
Thank you. You're absolutely right. I mean, in many ways, we already had an economic divide before the pandemic, and we've seen that even in APAC. But the pandemic has actually deepened that divide. And once you look at it in terms of the economic divide, there's also quite a significant digital divide within the APAC region. Right now in the APAC region, only 60% of the population have access to the internet. So you have another 40% of the population that don't have access, partly because in many economies, there is insufficient digital infrastructure. There's also insufficient digital training and education. So I think one of the ways we need to address is to get policymakers, the private sector, and others to come together to see what needs to be done in trying to bridge that digital divide. Because if you can bridge the digital divide, you can also bridge the poverty divide. It's all interconnected. So I think this is something that certainly many economies are doing, and even in APAC. I think I forgot to answer your question. Related to APAC initiatives. I mean, within APAC, we have the APAC Internet and Digital Economy Roadmap that was endorsed in 2017, and that tries to address, in many ways, that digital divide that was raised. So we're talking about infrastructure, we're looking at digital education, and also looking at greater applications of digital technologies to facilitate greater at the customs level. So, if you want to promote greater e-commerce, you need to find ways to see how we can improve the applications of different kinds of technology, paperless trading, or using single windows to make it easier and cheaper for goods to move across borders. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Dennis. We only have 3 minutes left, so I will try to get everyone to make a 1-minute intervention before we close. So John, starting with you.
Maybe I could just echo Dennis's comments, and the issue of closing the digital divide with respect to low information users, understanding how to design for low literacy users, doing it in local language, making sure that you're sharing with these new communities the challenges, the cyber risks, the digital safety and security risks, the misinformation, disinformation challenges. And these are things that need to be done in partnership with private sector, with civil society, and with government. It's not exclusively a firm level issue. It's not a citizens exclusive issue. It's something that needs to be done in partnership with many stakeholders, because of the inherent complexity. There's a lot of dimensions to the challenge, but we've identified a lot of really important ones, and we can work together to address some of those.
Okay, thank you so much, John. And I think it's a multi-stakeholder approach that you kind of mentioned, so that's really critical. And any last final words before we wrap up?
I was just going to echo that same sentiment, and I had mentioned earlier of multi-stakeholder engagement, because it's really important, and to be able to have that local context and that local content also connect with the people that we're trying to build these technologies for and trying to safeguard our people for. And so really a lot of it is, while there might be a lot of people at the table, at least having that sort of understanding across the board is really important, because it's not just a digital issue, or it's not just a cyber issue, but really tackling it from the grassroots up.
Great, thank you so much. And I like that you mentioned that it's always starting from bottom up. So always think about your community and grassroots. Andrew, can I come to you to do your closing remark?
Sure, thank you. And maybe just to pick up on that notion of digital divide, I think it's a really important one, something we need to really keep always a very strong focus on. It's often said that every kind of challenges and opportunity. And I think we heard some great examples in this chat about some of the opportunities that came through COVID. And I think there are ways in which we can use and should look to use digital tech as a leveler, certainly for some emerging economies as a leapfrog technology, and also for small business as a way to dramatically reduce cost. We know that digital tech reduces export cost by 80%. So these are different ways in which I think sections of the communities that are not always advantaged can take advantage. And so I think we need to do both. Let's look to see the challenges, and let's look to make sure we're actively working to maximize the opportunities that digital tech also provides in light of the challenges.
Great. Thank you so much, Andrew. Dennis, you have the last remark, but there is a question that I would like you to quickly address. It's regarding the cross-border digital payments without depending on financial institutes to upgrade their core banking system. Do you have any thoughts on how we can take advantage of the existing advanced mobile network system from an APAC point of view? And then you can make your last remarks and then we'll close.
I think there's already been, we have a finance ministers process in APAC. So they've been talking about different types of fintech and applications. And to some extent, it's already happening now with these sorts of financial technologies. It's actually helping a lot of small, medium enterprises to do it with their cash flow and other things, right? But at the same time, I personally believe that your financial institutions still need to be strong, otherwise, what you don't want to happen is that you end up with a bit of a financial crisis if things are not well regulated on the financial side. So my last point before I end is to say that we talked a lot about the digital divide, poverty divide, these poverty issues, economic divide. I think it all boils down to this. As we move towards the post-pandemic environment, nobody is safe until everybody is safe, which means that everybody needs to get vaccinated, right? And right now, I think we all know that there's the distribution of vaccination is not equitable, right? So we are having those who have been the haves and have-nots. So I think it's quite crucial as we move forward to make sure that everyone, the whole population, as much as possible, gets vaccinated.
Sorry, I was on mute. That last point about getting vaccinated, I think it's very important to get vaccinated and don't believe in misinformation, okay? So on this note, let's all thank our panelists. Thank you so much for your intervention. And I thoroughly enjoyed the intervention from the audience. Unfortunately, we're running out of, we've already run out of time, but you know what, one quick one, can we have a photo session? So if you could just quickly turn on your video. I'll do a quick snapshot. Andrew, and John, Dennis, thank you so much for your time. And I see so lovely people. Smile. And I see Winston trying to focus his camera. Okay, smile everyone. I'm taking a photo. Awesome. One more. Perfect. Thank you so much for your time. And don't forget, there's another session, but also closing and wrapping up. So take care, look after yourself, stay safe.
Thank you.
Andrew, John, and Dennis, thank you so much for that.